Yesterday we left off with the Spanish Empire in the Americas, and specifically their conquest of the Mayan, the Incan, and the Aztec empires. We talked about this as the conquistadors. Remember, conquistador, conquista is conquer. The Reconquista was what they had done to reconquer the Iberian Peninsula. They took that same Reconquista strategy and applied it to conquering the Americas. The idea here is to force people to adopt Spanish culture. You force them to learn the language. The religion. In this case, Catholicism. And you do this by moving on in and living among the people you are trying to change or drive out. Now, in this case, of course, the Spanish aren't as interested in driving them out as they were with the Moors. They're more interested in changing the locals, the indigenous people. There's another big difference between the Reconquista strategy here and what was done in the Iberian Peninsula. The difference is the population. There aren't a lot of Spanish women among the explorers or the conquistadors. As a result, we get a lot of intermarriage and interbreeding with indigenous people. And this produced what is still today known as the mestizo population, a mix of European and indigenous people. And control is maintained through the encomienda system. And this is going to look a lot like feudalism. The Spanish government grants a piece of land to a conquistador. Just as peasants went with a manor, the native population goes with the land given to the conquistador. And although there are legal standards about the treatment of the natives, guess what? The government that makes those rules and might enforce those rules is on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And on our side of the Atlantic Ocean, the conquistadors ignored those rules, by and large. And so they treated the natives as slaves. This was a very brutal system. If you're wondering, what is this supposed to depict? This is gold mining. I know it's not necessarily what we think gold mining looks like. It looks a lot like the mining for things like coltan in the Democratic Republic of the Congo today. Just these pits dug into the sides of hills or straight down into the ground. This is not down deep in mountains. Thank you, Brooklyn. But it was a brutal system and resulted in the deaths of many more natives as the system went on. But it was effective from the standpoint of the Spanish in terms of taking control of these territories. Spain and Portugal shared the Iberian Peninsula, and they shared the Americas. But there is conflict here. The Spanish jumped into the game in no small part because they were jealous of their Portuguese neighbors. I mean, here's littler Portugal conquering all of this land and exploring all of these places. And the Spanish are jealous. First, they're jealous of what the Portuguese have pulled off in Africa and Asia. Bless you. And that's what sends Columbus off on his adventure to find Asia. The Spanish send him to do this. Columbus is actually Italian, which is the real reason, as far as I can tell, that we actually have Columbus Day. Because if you tried to get rid of Columbus Day, Italian Americans would be very upset. And if you're wondering what college history class I learned that in, I didn't. I learned it from an HBO series called The Sopranos. I had no clue as to why we had Columbus Day. Then I watched The Sopranos and it all made sense. So sometimes, kids, you can learn things from TV.
Good morning. Can the following students please come to the cafeteria? Jonathan Baker, Sutton James, Kaysaline Cam, Dave Linder, Hervin Mauricio, Naeem McConnell, Rosa Montero Zamora, Mary Morris, and Lauren Rauer. Please come to the cafeteria for the work keys. Thank you.
Are we going to get it through the phone too? I'm afraid to start. All right, I'm going to tempt fate here. Columbus is supposed to find Asia. He thinks he has found Asia. And guess what? Other people thought he found Asia. The Portuguese thought, shoot, Columbus has found Asia. He's found a different way to get there and a way we don't control. Right, of course, he hadn't, and Spain didn't control this other way. But this really ramped up the rivalry between Portugal and Spain.
Pardon the interruption. With the following students please come to the cafeteria for your work keys? Gabe Torres, Layla Suez, Charles Strader, Kate Sparger, Braden Sharp, Q Trong, Julia Van Gundy, Iker Vincente Felico, Caleb Watkins, Autumn Webster, and William Weeks. Thank you.
And because both Portugal and Spain were very strong in the Catholic camp, the Pope helped resolve this rivalry. In the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, so this is just within 2 years of Columbus believing he has discovered Asia. It divided up the New World between Spain and Portugal. Here's the line. Portuguese side, Spanish side. Now, those of you who have some understanding of geography and also awareness that the Earth is indeed a globe that goes all the way around, this is a problem. You can't just draw one line on the globe and say you get what's to this side and you get what's to that side because the Earth is a complete circle, right? And so dividing it up with a single line isn't going to be enough. Also, because maps were not very well written, this does not give Portugal enough of what would become Brazil. So they had to tinker with things as time went on, but it did keep the peace between Spain and Portugal. And so is one of the most successful peace treaties in history. What's that?
They literally split the globe.
Yeah, they literally split the globe in two. Again, the problem is when you wrap around to the other side, like it turns out you kind of need two lines. But yeah, that was what they tried to do. Okay. And now for the Dutch. Nobody thinks about the Dutch. Well, not nobody, but in the United States, very few of us think about the Dutch as an imperial power. You probably don't really think much about the Dutch at all. But right, they were a new country and they had grand ambitions. They had only just become an independent country in 1581. Right, so we're way past at the start of the Protestant Reformation, although Protestantism is one of the reasons that the Dutch want to be independent from Spain. And in just 19 more years, they have become a major naval power in the world. Well, naval, but also in terms of a trading fleet. So, economic and military sea power. And if some of you are wondering, aren't the Dutch people the guys who have all the tulips and wooden shoes? Yes, and yes. But they also had a tremendous fleet, 20,000 ships. Now, these aren't aircraft carriers and giant container ships like we have today, but 20,000 is still a large number, right, and an impressive fleet. So how did the Dutch do this? They fight off the Spanish, right? The Netherlands itself is a tricky place even to exist because it is called the Netherlands because most of it is below sea level. And so the Dutch have to fight to keep their dry ground dry. And yet they managed to do that, fight off the Spanish, and become a world power. How'd they do it? Well, instead of focusing on 3 G's, they just picked their favorite 2. Right? Gold and glory. Partly because there were still Catholics and Protestants, different kinds of Protestants in the Netherlands, and it was best to set religion aside and focus on things that all the Dutch could agree on, and that is getting rich and having some glory. Also, the Dutch were very smart, and this is where I know it gets boring. You're expecting like some story of some brilliant military commander. No, they were really good at banking and figuring out how governments could borrow money. Lots of the way our economy works today in terms of having a stock market, government bonds that let the government borrow money, the very thing that lets our government owe the world over $30 trillion, and yet life goes on, is owed to the Dutch. Other European countries ran out of money all the time. Monarchs were always trying to have to find new ways to scrape up some cash for the next war or the next building project. But the Dutch figured out how to do banking and government bonds. And in another stroke of genius, the Dutch said, look, hey, we're not going to put the government on the line for conquering and running these colonies. We're going to use private companies to do it. We'll let them go out and do it. They either succeed or fail, but if they fail, it's no real loss to us. And if they succeed, great. We'll squeeze them for some money and make ourselves richer. And it worked, right? All these areas shaded in here are Dutch colonial possessions. And we've got some outposts scattered around, even up to Japan. And the companies they used to pull this off were the Dutch East and Dutch West India companies, or Indies companies. There are also the British East and West Indies companies that kind of makes this a little confusing. These Dutch companies weren't crazy. What they were able to do was kind of crazy and shocking by our standards. They were both created to run the Asian trade, right? Different parts of it, but they could run this trade. They were able to make their own money, and so we get coins like this. Most of the time, the only people allowed to make money are governments. They could also make their own treaties, right? And treaties are legal agreements with foreign people or foreign governments. And just like printing money, most of the time, the only things that can make treaties are governments. And yet the Dutch allowed these companies to have that legal authority. They also formed their own private militaries. And so in this way, they are a lot like Russia's Wagner Group or Wagner Group. They're able to run around blowing things up, conquering territory, and killing people. And it's all made legitimate by the Dutch government. They used this military power and their ability to make money and treaties to push the Portuguese out of Asia. Bless you, Briar. So this little country and young country becomes the dominant force in trading in the Indian Ocean. Yes, Brooklyn. You may. Let's see if there are some passes hanging out, so I haven't had time to cut the new stack. The Dutch also show up in our neck of the woods with a colony in North America. Europeans weren't always terribly creative at naming their colonies. They named it the New Netherlands. All right, this is an area that an explorer named Hudson, Henry Hudson, had explored. That is why it's called, yep. And Hudson's Bay and all of those things. And if you're wondering, why is this like, this is the first explorer we've heard about and the only one we've heard about like since Columbus. Don't worry, we've got an explorer scavenger hunt coming up next week. We're going to learn more about some of these explorers. Some of you are now dreading that. It's going to be all right. And it's in what is the modern northeast or mid-Atlantic part of the United States. Oh, what happened there? Is there something in your notes that's supposed to be there, Kai, or is it all right? Okay, modern, oh, got it. I just botched the bullet points. Now, they were after a different kind of gold. Because remember, gold is our shorthand for getting rich. They got their money by killing mammals. There was lots of money in trapping, killing, and skinning, right, the gentle mammals of the forest. Things like muskrats and minks and all kinds of other little things like pine martens, and also the unfortunate beaver who got caught in traps because they liked to take the fur and turn it into hats. Not like some of you now have images of Davy Crockett in a coonskin cap, not the same kind of thing. If you take the fur and do things to it, you press it into a hat that looks like a cowboy hat, and they're really expensive. I don't know why. I don't own any, but there was a lot of money in the fur trade. Less now, but still, if you want one of those hats, they're really expensive. But at this time, because of what Europeans were wearing, there was tons of money in the fur trade. So much money that trappers nearly wiped out a lot of these mammals across the entire continent of North America, what becomes the United States and Canada. And because of all this money in the fur trade, it was a profitable colony, but not a lot of Dutch wanted to go live there. Did you look one up, Xander? Yeah, no, they're incredibly expensive. And now we get to England, the colonial power that most of you have learned about because I'm guessing some point in middle school, you got that early American history. And we do celebrate Independence Day every 4th of July to remind the world that we are no longer part of England. Now, the English were like the Dutch in a lot of ways. Right? They were late to the party. England was really like a country that had a lot of civil problems at home, not very rich. Monarchs were always running out of money. So they were late to the game. And remember, in 1588, we learned that Queen Elizabeth had to fight off a Spanish armada, which is like a large navy fleet, trying to invade England. So they had to beat Spain, which they did. They did defeat the Spanish armada. They also had a lot of help from storms. Not knocking the English. They also had some brilliant strategies like setting ships on fire and just sailing them in to scatter the Spanish. That was brilliant. And they kind of follow the Dutch playbook. Partly because after the English have one of these civil wars and they kill a monarch, and then the people who killed the monarch lose, and we get a new monarch. William of Orange comes over from the Netherlands and brings with him all of that banking know-how and the know-how to create companies. So they borrow a Dutch monarch, and they borrow a lot of the plays from the Dutch imperial playbook. They build up a fleet, and like the Dutch, they also work to push Portugal out of Asia. Yeah, so poor Portugal. They do all of this work, and then in not so very long a time, these upstart Brits and, well, at this point, still English, really. The English and the Dutch kick them out of Asia. And as we all know already, the English found colonies in North America. I don't mean they discovered them. I mean they established colonies in North America. But unlike the Dutch, the English focused on India. The Dutch had been much more interested in what would become Indonesia. As we saw on that map, they had a little bit of a presence in India, but that's where the English will focus. We'll learn more about why they did that in a bit when we talk about the rivalry between the two. The start of English colonization is Jamestown in 1606. This is the story that is told with tremendous historical inaccuracy by Disney's Pocahontas. The only part of that movie that is authentically historical is that once upon a time, the forest creatures of North America could sing and speak. I think that's a historical fact. Does that sound right, Jasper? I think that's what they teach you in middle school, right? That the animals before. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I don't want to upset things. Animals in North America once could speak, and they all spoke English, oddly enough. But now they don't. Yeah, everybody. That's right, including all of the Native Americans who had not previously met any English people, but they all spoke and, in fact, could sing in quite good English. Now, the English, right, all joking aside, and because this will get posted to YouTube, I do want to make sure it's all joking aside. I don't want somebody going to Alex Jones to report there was a conspiracy to make the creatures of our forests no longer speak English. They wanted to find gold because Spain, like everywhere they went in the Americas, it seemed they found gold or they found silver, and the English were stealing a lot of it through piracy, but they wanted to find it their own. Right? So they didn't have to chase the Spanish around the oceans to get it. The problem was they were so fixated on getting gold that nobody planted food. And when you don't plant food and you are halfway, well, not halfway across the world, but you're across an ocean from home, you starve. And they also suffered a lot of disease. When you're starving, your body is weak, your immune system is weak, it's much more likely that you get disease. They also got a lot of themselves killed by fighting with the natives. And so, in less than 5 years, roughly 9 of 10 settlers in Jamestown is dead. But, hey, 10% are still left. More will show up, and eventually the colony stabilizes. And the reason that we spend a whole slide talking about one single settlement in a world increasingly full of imperial possessions and colonies is that they get bragging rights as the first permanent English settlement in the Americas, well, in North America. Right, which, as far as the English are concerned, is America because that's the place they get their foothold. Spanish and Portuguese have really got strong dominance in South America. And the English do eventually find their gold. But of course, it is not actual gold, it's tobacco. But lots of money to be made in tobacco. Even though the King of England at the time really hated tobacco, he thought it smelled bad when it was burned. He was pretty sure that it was bad for your health, although there were all these books at the time that told you like all the wonderful things tobacco would do for your health, right? Including not just smoking it or chewing on it or snorting it up your nose, but also tobacco enemas. Enemas. So that is where you put something into your colon via your rectum. And I don't have like there's no hey, don't look at me like I use the professional words. Like I don't know what else. I mean, there are less professional ways to say it that we would all be more comfortable hearing, but again, this is going to YouTube, so I've got to keep it professional. Don't try it. Don't look it up on your school computer, but it was a thing. There were all kinds of books written about the medical uses of tobacco. Now, if you were thinking, but what about the Pilgrims? Well, okay, we won't leave the Pilgrims out. Other English were motivated by primarily one G, and it wasn't gold and it wasn't glory, but religion, or as it stands in for us with our 3 G's, God. In the 1620s, it's the Pilgrims. In the 1630s, it's the Puritans. And both of them, we're not going to go into the big differences between the groups. You guys did get that kind of thing in middle school and elementary school. They came here for religious freedom. Not for other people. They really didn't want other people to have it, but they did want it for themselves. And they show up in Massachusetts. The Pilgrims, kind of like Columbus, ended up in the wrong spot. But this proved to be good for them. Since they didn't show up in the right spot, they realized, well, we're kind of really not under the authority of anybody. And so they created the first self-governing community in the Americas through the Mayflower Compact, where they all agreed that they would govern themselves. I said we would get to what's going on between the English and the Dutch. We know the English and the Dutch were kicking the Portuguese out of Asia. We know the Dutch and the English are also both showing up in America. There is conflict. And we think about the British as having the world's largest empire. That's kind of our historical experience with them. But again, the Dutch are incredibly successful, and when the Brits, not Brits at this point, early on, the English are moving into the East Indies, the Dutch don't like it, and the Dutch push them back out. And as a result of this, the English turn their attention to India, and this is why India will become the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. Back in North America, the English are more successful. They take the New Netherlands away from the Dutch, and they do it without a fight. And that is why New Netherlands becomes New York. And it's named for this snappy dresser, the Duke of York. Right? Clearly, from the way he's dressed, you can tell why there was not a fight. Right? A guy dressed like that is going to kill you. Right? Because the only reason he's able to dress like that is because everyone is afraid of him. Right? Brian's not going to laugh at him because Brian knows what happens if you laugh at a guy dressed like that, and he's going to kill you. Right? That's all I can figure. Right? That's why they gave up without a fight. No, actually, reality, the Dutch just cared about making money. Like, well, why fight the English if we can live here and continue to make money? Right? Who do we care? What do we care who's technically in charge of us? And so the Dutch give up in North America without a fight. Things are going to be different with the French. The French try and get in on this game too. They're able to get a little bit of a foothold in India, but not much. Partly because the British are really going to focus on controlling India. But the French do have tremendous success in North America for a very long time, the better part of 300 years. As you can see in this map, as of 1750, so only 25 years before we start the earliest fighting against the British for our independence, New France includes all of this. Which, to put it briefly, means they have tremendously large colonial territory here. That's why we have a Robidoux Middle School, because Joseph Robidoux, a French trader, was the founder of St. Joseph. But kind of like the Dutch, they focused much more on the fur trade and not so much on actually settling and establishing cities and things like that. Because a lot of this territory, especially over here in the Rockies and up north into, well, still following the Rockies, but into Canada, this area here, fantastic place for killing small creatures of the forest that have really great fur. Once again, that makes them like the Dutch. There aren't many people showing up. Lots of them are men, and not women coming with them, so we don't get communities set up. And just as we had the Dutch clashing with the English, we've got the British with the French. And now I really can say British and not have to correct myself. As we get into this time period, we do have Great Britain. England becomes the United Kingdom of Great Britain in 1707, when Scotland and England and Wales are formally joined as one kingdom. And the Brits are doing something different to the Dutch and the French. We've got a large colonial population. Part of it is because we've got those religious settlers that aren't just here to make money. Right? They escaped. Right? Whole families come over. They set up communities. When you have families, you have babies. Those babies grow up to make families of their own, and we've got a large population. And if you notice, the population of New France in 1700, 15,000. Population of the English part, 250,000. And, but they've got much less land. They're all hemmed in here by the Appalachian Mountains, stopping their way from moving farther west. And France has all of this territory. There's this bit in the middle. It's kind of up for grabs. And that's the Ohio River Valley. Both of them want it. Neither of them is really all that concerned about asking the Native Americans if they would like to give it up. Now, I mean, they do, like the British and the French have allies among the different native nations, but they're primarily interested in taking this for themselves. All right, the results that we get, and I know you guys also learned about this because my fourth grader has just recently learned this in school. Right, we get the French and Indian War, which is a confusing title. It sounds like the French are fighting the Indians, but it is the French and their native allies fighting against the English and their native allies. This goes on for about 9 years. It's linked to a war in Europe. Yet another war of succession. Don't worry about that. And the Brits and their native allies are victorious. Tremendously victorious. As a result of this, the British get all of the French land. And not necessarily all of it at once. I know it's a little more complicated story than that, because there is that thing called the Louisiana Purchase, where the United States, as a young country, will buy this territory roughly in there from France. And I realize I've moved us on into exit slip time. That's okay. Don't take the exit slip. If you did, I'll fix things and it'll be okay, but don't take it if you haven't started it already. I don't want to leave out a part of the story that does often get left out, and that is the West Indies. All of this area in here. All right, most of the empires we've talked about, and some we really haven't, claimed parts of the West Indies. Right? There were lots of little islands. You found one, you could conquer it, claim it for yourself. And so we see even Denmark and Sweden get in on this. And this is important for understanding our part of the world because of its legacy. The big thing to set up on these islands were sugar plantations. And plantation economies have problems. They are totally dependent, for whether they are rich or poor, on the prices for a few cash crops, or the success of growing those few cash crops. If you have a bad harvest, you're broke. If the price for what you grow goes down, you're broke. And being broke is a problem because you have to buy your food. You are so focused on growing these cash crops that you don't actually produce your own food. And again, this makes them vulnerable to price swings. It did then, it still does now, because a lot of these countries have never truly been able to get past having economies that are really dependent on a small number of cash crops. And, of course, also, this is a big part of the history of slavery in the Americas. Because, and that's the end of your notes for this, these little colonies in the West Indies were more economically valuable at the time of the American Revolution than the rest of North America itself. All right. Well done, everybody. Thank you. All right. Please pack up your things. You guys did move to 5 days in a row of professionalism points. Well done on that, too.